Hi, it's Jerry Corley, standupcomedyclinic.com, with another episode of Ask the Joke Doctor. In this episode, we're covering the question, does it really take 10 years to find your persona? Welcome back to Ask the Joke Doctor. I just got a question the other day from a student of mine. He tweeted at Ask the Joke Doctor. He said, Joke Doctor, does it really take 10 years to find your persona? Around town, I'm hearing from comics, and they say it takes 10 years to find your persona. First of all, let me address that. I don't know where this magical number 10 years came from. Like, you know, hey, at 9.5, you're almost there, but you got to wait a few months, and then you're going to hit 10 years, and that's magically your persona will appear. That's, that's ridiculous. A lot of times, especially in this art form, in comedy, you know, think about this. Comedy's still relatively new as an art form in our history. If we go back to fine arts, if we go back to sculpting, if we go back to painting, dancing, music, acting, they go way back to the Greek days, and stand-up comedy as we know it's pretty much about 75, 80 years old in this country. So it's still a relatively new art form. People throw around rumor and innuendo and urban lore like it's actually fact. Anytime anybody paints anything with a broad brush, really you just got to kind of shrug your shoulders because they think they know it, but they don't really know it. I mean, despite the evidence of everything to the contrary being right before their very eyes, they'll cast out like facts like it takes 10 years to find your persona, like, you know, that's the rule. It's let's take a look. You want evidence? Jerry Seinfeld. From the first day he stepped on stage in his early 20s, I think he was 20 or 21, when he stepped on stage at Catch a Rising Star in New York City, that first time on stage where he froze for that 5 minutes. I think he was up there for like a minute and a half, and he just walked off the stage. Then he came back again and could only do premises. Then he just kept working and kept working. From that day, 5 years later, he was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and pretty much from that day on, he's never really changed. He's still, what is it with bugs? Still the same guy he was back then. So 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. What's the quotient, right? How do you know? Lots of guys have their own individual approaches towards comedy. I mean, George Burns, the famous George Burns, he reinvented himself, I think, 5 to 8 times before he finally hit on George Burns. So you'll go through evolutions. The first goal, as far as persona, I think, is to find out if you can be the guy you are around your friends on that stage in front of strangers. That's the first goal. If you can do that, you're off to a start as far as finding your persona. Your persona may evolve. When I started out very Seinfeldian. You know, despite the fact that I grew up listening to George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Bill Cosby, I wound up being more Seinfeldian in my early days, and then to the point where I was actually ridiculed by Seinfeld. I was actually on stage at the Laugh Factory, and I was doing stuff like, you know, I saw a sign that said, positively no smoking, as opposed to negatively smoke please. That's kind of the way I started, and then Seinfeld was standing right there. He had done a set earlier, just kind of looked at me and went, yeah, whatever. And so eventually I found my voice. It was after I met George Carlin, and he said to me, take the shit that drives you absolutely crazy and make that funny. So that's what really turned me on. That's how I started to find my persona, if you will, which is basically just me being myself and being pretty cynical about the socio-political mess that this country's in. And we're always in some sort of socio-political mess, aren't we? There's always something going on that we can pick on. So the 5-year, 10-year thing, there's no such thing. Some people say 7 years, some people say 10 years. Here's the deal. When you first start, you're spending the first 3 to 5 years just trying to figure out how to write jokes. Isn't that so? It's like people just trying to figure out the mechanics of what triggers laughter. But when you know how to write at an early point, when you understand what triggers human laughter, like the 9 psychological laughter triggers and the structures, the way to write in order to pull those triggers, like through a reverse or incongruity or paradox or comedic irony or using recognition or ambivalence to trigger a laugh, then you're way ahead of everybody already. So it doesn't take as long to find your persona. But these rules that people lay out always blow my mind. It's like, don't listen to the rules. Picasso said, you got to know the rules before you can break the rules. But that particular thing is not even a rule. It's just something somebody made up. 10 years to find your persona, whatever. Mark Lonau, who was the co-owner at the Improv in Los Angeles here, he used to have this little orientation for all the new comics that were coming in that wanted to to audition for a spot at the Improv. And I remember during that orientation, he said to the group of new comedians, he said, it takes 7 years to become a headliner. Like, again, that's the rule. Like at 6 years and 9 months, you're going to go 3 more months and I'll be headlining. It doesn't work that way. When he said 7 years, I said to myself, I'm going to beat that. And I started headlining. I headlined my first gig in 3.5 years. When I said that in a class, to my class, one of my students said, I beat that. I did 3.5 years. He said to himself, I'm going to beat that. So he did it in 2.5 years. He was headlining and also did TV before that. See, interestingly enough, this guy says 10 years. And then another guy also in one of my comments on my blog said, because I have a course called How to Be the Richest Comedian Nobody's Ever Heard Of. Because it's basically my blueprint for how I was making $250,000 a year as a stand-up, and nobody knew my name. Because I was not just doing stand-up, I was creating multiple revenue streams with my comedy and making money. So, but this guy put on the blog, hey, don't even expect to make any money until you've been in this business 10 years. Again, some little number that popped out of the blue that he decides is a rule for everybody else. And the thing that bothers me about that is like, you've got these people that want to get into this business, that are really eager about being comedians, and then they got guys who are making up this shit that makes no sense. Don't buy it. Just stop listening to people with these arbitrary rules. Just be you, be the best you could be. I know how cliche that sounds, but just be you. Just be the best you. Just go out there and start to explore. Get out there and start, being super confident with your identity, no matter who you are. And even if your persona changes, just get up there and be you. And don't worry about what anybody else is thinking, and try to set goals. Somebody said to me, 7 years, 10 years to make any money? Really, 10 years? It was less than 2 years that I was in this business that I was making money in comedy. And I was doing it in corporate and not in the clubs. So, $800 a gig to start. And that's how I started in this business. So don't listen to these guys that come up with this arbitrary nonsense and try to paint something with a broad brush. You've got to take your own journey. Each individual will find their own way. But that 10-year stuff to find your persona doesn't have to be that way. It might take that long, depends on you. But in the long run, you're going to do what you do, and eventually you're going to find yourself. First goal, be able to be you on stage and not just recite material. Mechanics of the materials is one thing, the structure of the material is one thing, but being able to be in the moment and have a conversation with the audience, you're going to find yourself. I skewed towards being cynical and doing socio-political material. Anthony Jeselnik, in his interview that I saw online, he actually said that he was just practicing doing jokes, man. He was just doing jokes with an audience, and he hit a couple of dark jokes, and he seemed like that's what the audience was kind of responding to the best, so that's the direction he went. So he actually was inspired by Jack Handy's Deep Thoughts on Saturday Night Live. Remember that little segment, a little interstitial they had? They'd run Jack Handy's Deep Thoughts. He would he kind of played his material off of that, did versions of that. Started with the deep thought and then came up with his own, and that was kind of his direction. And then he found out that the dark ones, the edgy ones, were the ones that people were responding to, and he stayed and he went that direction. So 10 years, 7 years, 5 years, 2 years, 1.5 years, it doesn't matter. Just get up there and be you and find your own voice and stop listening to these things. Maybe you found your voice. And then some guy says 10 years and you're like, I couldn't have found my voice because the dude said 10 years. It's nothing like that. It's like everybody's an individual. They do their own thing. And you can break all those rules that are out there and find your own way. So I hope this helped add value to your day. Remember, if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter at twitter.com, where my handle is @JokeDoctor, and ask the question, then hashtag it with AskTheJokeDoctor. It's great to have you here. I hope to see you again. Have a great day. Go out and be funny, and I hope you're writing every day. Take care.